The era of the infinite package is facing its first true physical limit. For nearly a decade, the sight of a Blue Prime delivery van was the undisputed pulse of the Canadian consumer economy, a relentless, algorithmic heartbeat that suggested growth had no ceiling. But recently, a quiet tremor moved through the industrial corridors of Ontario, Alberta, and Quebec. Amazon, a titan that once inhaled Canadian real estate like oxygen, began a sudden, systematic pause. Multi-million dollar fulfillment centers, once destined to be the cathedrals of modern commerce, have been canceled, delayed, or subleased before a single employee could step inside. This isn't just a corporate pivot, it is a fundamental disruption in the logistics of the North. The world is watching because if the most data-rich entity on the planet is pulling back from one of its most reliable markets, the signal it's sending about the global economy is far louder than a simple construction delay. This event represents a massive recalibration of the growth at all costs ideology that has defined the last 20 years. We are witnessing the first major collision between digital ambition and the hard reality of a shifting physical world. The expansion was predicated on a set of assumptions about how we live, work, and spend that are now being dismantled in real time. For years, the narrative was that e-commerce would inevitably consume all of retail until the physical store was a relic of the past. But as the cranes stand still in sites like Churchill Gardens or the outskirts of Saskatoon, a different story is emerging. It is a story of miscalculation, changing human behavior, and a sudden realization that the digital gold rush might have reached its geographic and psychological borders. The reaction from the markets has been one of quiet concern, not because of a lack of capital, but because of what this reveals about the hidden friction in the global supply chain. This isn't just about warehouses, it is about the end of an era of predictable expansion. To understand why this is happening now, we have to look past the spreadsheets and into the invisible mechanics of how a global giant overplayed its hand in a quest for total market dominance. Because while the headlines call this a scaling back, the internal reality is something far more calculated and far more concerning for the future of the global consumer. Behind every canceled lease is a complex web of predictive modeling that finally failed to account for human unpredictability. The hidden mechanics of this retreat lie in the bullwhip effect, a phenomenon in supply chain management where small fluctuations in demand at the retail level cause massive distorted swings in wholesale and production planning. During the global lockdowns, Amazon operated under a psychological mandate. They believed the temporary surge in digital dependency was a permanent structural shift. They spent billions building a just-in-case infrastructure to replace the just-in-time model. In Canada, this meant doubling a footprint that had taken 20 years to build in a mere 24 months. The institutional psychology here was one of defensive aggression: buy the land and build the capacity so no competitor could ever catch up. However, the stakes have shifted, the cost of debt has skyrocketed, and the price of maintaining massive, half-empty structures in high-tax Canadian jurisdictions has become a liability rather than an asset. We are seeing a rare moment where the algorithm met a wall of reality. The Canadian consumer did not stay home forever. As inflation eroded discretionary income, the high-velocity spending required to justify these five-story, robot-filled monoliths simply evaporated. This is the psychology of the sunk cost, but on a planetary scale. Amazon isn't just saving money on concrete and steel. They are reacting to a policy-level realization that the labor market in Canada is tightening to a breaking point. You cannot run a warehouse the size of a small city if there are no workers left to staff it at a viable margin. This represents a strategic pivot from territorial conquest to operational efficiency. The stakes are no longer about owning the map. They are about surviving the margin compression that is currently suffocating the retail sector. The company is now forced to optimize the chaos they built during the fever dream of 2021. They are scrutinizing every square foot of Canadian soil for its yield per second, a metric that is currently falling. But as they pull back their physical borders to protect their balance sheet, they've stumbled into a secondary problem, one that involves the very fabric of how cities are built and how local economies survive. But here's the part nobody expected. The retreat isn't just about saving money, it's about a fundamental flaw in the way we've mapped the future of labor. This transition reveals that the predictive analytics we once thought were infallible are vulnerable to the simplest of human variables: the desire for physical interaction and the reality of a shrinking middle-class wallet. Canada is the canary in the coal mine for a global logistical cooling. Markets from South Korea to Germany are observing the Canadian pause as a blueprint for their own upcoming corrections. Historically, when a dominant market force like Amazon hits a plateau in a G7 nation, it signals a transition from an expansionary phase of capitalism to a cannibalistic one. We can find a historical parallel in the great railway bursts of the 19th century, where overinvestment in infrastructure led to a decade of ghost tracks before the economy finally caught up. Today, behavioral economics tells us that the convenience premium has hit a ceiling. People are no longer willing to pay the invisible costs of total digital reliance, and the power structures are feeling the heat. In the eyes of global competitors, this retreat is seen as a rare moment of vulnerability. It suggests that even with the most advanced artificial intelligence and predictive logistics, a corporation can still be blindsided by the human element, the simple fact that people's habits are more resilient than software. This is a power structure insight. Dominance is not just about size, it is about the ability to sustain that size under pressure. Across the world, governments are now looking at these empty plots of land and half-finished shells as symbols of a digital overhang. The leverage has shifted. For years, cities offered tax breaks and zoning miracles to lure the giant. Now they are left with dark stores and broken promises of job creation. This has created a new friction in the geopolitical landscape of commerce. Countries are realizing that hitching their economic wagon to a single digital entity creates a fragile ecosystem. The Amazon effect was once a promise of revitalization. Now, in the face of this scale back, it is being re-evaluated as a potential risk to regional stability. The behavioral shift is clear. The world is moving away from the everything store model and toward a more fragmented, localized, and resilient form of trade. This isn't just a Canadian story, it's the first chapter in a global book about the limits of scale. The data suggests that the more we try to centralize the world's goods, the more fragile the system becomes. And as we look deeper into the logistics of this withdrawal, it becomes clear that it gets deeper than just business. It touches upon the very way we understand the value of land and the permanence of digital trends. The real-world impact of this scaling back is already vibrating through the lives of thousands of workers and hundreds of local municipalities. For the average family, this shift manifests as a subtle but permanent change in the cost of living. The era of subsidized convenience, where shipping was free and delivery was near instant, is ending. As Amazon optimizes its footprint, the last-mile costs will inevitably be passed back to the consumer. For the workers, the warehouse promise is flickering. In towns where these facilities were meant to be the new economic anchors, there is now a void. But the part the media isn't discussing is the ghost infrastructure being left behind. We are entering a period where massive tracts of industrial land are tied up in legal and financial limbo, preventing other industries from utilizing that space for more sustainable, local production. This is a pattern interrupt for the entire concept of globalization. We are moving toward regionalization, where the goal is no longer to ship a toothbrush across a continent in 24 hours, but to ensure the system doesn't collapse under its own weight. The real shift is the death of the efficiency at any cost model. We are seeing a return to a more friction-filled, but perhaps more stable, economic reality. The data reveals that while Amazon is pulling back from the physical world, they are doubling down on the virtual one, shifting their capital from warehouses to the server farms that power the next generation of automation. The warehouses were just the scaffolding. The real structure was always the data. This means the jobs that were promised are not just being delayed, they are being evolved out of existence. The quiet move to scale back in Canada is the first admission that the physical empire has reached its zenith. While the world watches the shuttering of these massive facilities, they are missing the broader transformation of the economy into something even more intangible and harder to regulate. The real-world consequence is a society that is physically overbuilt, but economically hollowed out. This is not a simple story of a corporation meeting a market downturn. It is the story of a civilization-wide correction. We are watching the visible edges of a digital entity begin to recede, leaving behind a landscape that must now figure out how to function without the constant infusion of algorithmic expansion. The tension between the speed of the internet and the slow, heavy reality of the physical world has never been more apparent. As these sites sit empty, they serve as a monument to a specific moment in time when we believed that the virtual world had finally conquered the physical one. But geography still matters. Logistics still matter. And the Canadian winter, both literal and economic, has a way of revealing the cracks in even the most sophisticated foundations. The lesson here is one of humility for the tech giants and one of caution for the rest of us. Because while the world is focused on this, the real transformation is already unfolding, quietly and in a place no one expects. The move away from the physical is just the prelude to a much more profound shift in how value itself is generated and harvested. What we are seeing in Canada is merely the first visible crack in a dam that has been holding back the weight of reality for far too long. The real shift isn't just in where the packages go, but in who controls the means of their arrival. And as the giant steps back, the vacuum left behind is already being filled by forces that the public has yet to even recognize. The architecture of our daily lives is being redesigned, not with bricks and mortar, but with a new set of rules that prioritize survival over speed. This is the silent calibration of the 21st century,